record on this. Okay, we are now recording on our last anatomy Zoom session for the year. It is Anatomy 120, and today we're covering the central auditory nervous system. Last week it was the eighth nerve. This week it's the central auditory nervous system. Always remember the eighth nerve. It's called a nerve, so it's part of the peripheral nervous system. Even though the eighth nerve is one of the 12 pairs of cranial nerves that comes off of the brain stem, you have 31 pairs of nerves that come off of the spinal cord. And the spinal cord, when it enters your brain or enters your skull, is called your brain stem. Okay, spinal cord, brain stem, and I'll show you pictures thereof, because now we're going in, leaving the eighth nerve. So you've got the outer ear, the middle ear, the inner ear, the eighth nerve, and now we're entering the brain stem. So let's share screen so that I can show you some pictures thereof. And shrink that guy and pull up this PowerPoint here. Okay, so last week we talked about the eighth nerve. And here's a picture of the spinal cord. Kind of interesting because you're looking at three nerves coming off of the spinal cord here and three on the other side. And notice how the spinal cord is gray on the inside and white on the outside. Now that's exactly the opposite to what happens when you get inside the brain. Kind of weird. So now when you have an eighth nerve fiber, here's where your eighth nerve, where I'm tracing, and as soon as you hit the brain stem, the proverbial crap hits the fan. I mean, now you've got an explosion of different cell types, because now you're not just dealing with, oh, I hear a tone. Now you're talking about patterns of sound, spatial distance of sound, much more conscious awareness of sound. So now here's a picture of your brain stem. So you've left your spinal cord. This is now entering into the brain or into the skull. So right here, it enters the skull, and it's still white on the outside, gray on the inside, but things happen behind this pons to reverse that, and we'll show that later. Anyway, look at the brain stem. This is a frontal view from the front, and you'll see three main sections. The bottom is called the medulla. The middle part is this bulge called the pons, French for bridge. Medulla is Greek for marrow. Don't ask me why. Who knows? And then this, for some reason, is called the midbrain, although it isn't really the middle of your brain, but that's what they call it. And I will show it now from the back. Okay, here's again the medulla would be at the bottom. I guess in front of this area would be the pons. And look at these four bumps. This is the midbrain. Okay, once again, midbrain, pons, medulla. So if someone's asking what's the three areas of your brain stem, midbrain, pons, medulla, going from the top to the middle to the bottom. All right, now here is a cross-section of your brain when you're actually looking at the brain sliced this way. So if someone just, now look at how the white areas are on the inside and the gray areas are on the outside. And that's an exact reversal of the way things were in the spinal cord. And that's why I write, no white areas inside the gray areas, opposite of the spinal cord. I've often said that a nice way or an interesting way to look at the brain is to take a piece of cauliflower or broccoli and then just slice it down the middle. And then you can see the florets on the outside, and then the big arms going down would be the white areas. Anyway, and this is now you're looking at the side of the brain stem. So now you've slit the person this way, okay, and you're just slicing right down the center. And anatomists, when they would It's kind of gross, but they pull the brain out of formaldehyde. They would have it pickled in this formaldehyde, and they would pull the brain out by the brain stem. They'd turn it over, so now you have the brain right side up, and they'd put a finger or a hand in that main central fissure of your brain, and they would encounter like a hard body, like a thunk, 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 and they wonder what that is. Well, sharing screen again will show you. It's this. It's that corpus callosum, a big white area. Okay, and your thunk, thunk, they'd be hitting that. Below that corpus callosum is this round area called your thalamus. Now, your thalamus, you can think of your thalamus like a grand central train station for all trains coming up from San Antonio, from St. Louis, everywhere, meeting in the heart of Joplin, Missouri. Oh, no, I'm just kidding. But all the train stations meeting at one place, all sensory information, vision, taste, touch, hearing, everything except smell. We don't get how smell works. The body, but all sensory information, all your senses, that information is integrated right there. Below that, there's your midbrain. Below that, there's your pons again. Below that is the medulla. So you're seeing they call this a sagittal cut. You're viewing sliced right down the middle here. Just showing you pictures first, just to kind of look at this. Here's another view, a sagittal view of the whole brain. So you're slicing right down the center. So this would be that big longitudinal fissure. If you were looking at a brain, you'd see the big slice here. There's that corpus callosum. And they call it that, corpus. Corpus means body. Callosum is callus, hard body. Thunk, thunk, okay? So here's that corpus callosum. Below that, the thalamus. Below that, the midbrain, the pons, the medulla. This area here is called your cerebellum. Your brain basically has three main areas. Brain stem, this whole area here, brain stem, cerebellum, and cerebrum, the great big one here. The cerebrum is where your thought takes place. The cerebellum, this little guy underneath, it's called the little brain. That controls your fine motor function. Without that, you're staggering when you're walking. People with cerebellar disorders are sometimes picked up for being drunk because they're staggering, and they're not, but they've got cerebellar dysfunction. Being able to sew or then you call it stick a thread through the needle through the eye of a needle. All that fine coordination is done at the level of the cerebellum. So if you could lose one area of the brain, I guess it would be this area, because without it, your mind is still all there. You have no problems thinking. You're not mentally disabled at all. You're physically disabled with fine motor control. Now, the back of your brain is for vision. And the sides of the brain are called the temporal lobes, and that's for audition and speech. Speech and hearing, vision, speech and hearing, and then your touch and feeling is right down the sides here, what they call the parietal lobes. And then your real thinking, your concentrated thinking and analysis is at your frontal lobe here. Anyway, these are just gross anatomy of the brain. Now, when you go into the brain stem, here you have a cochlea, auditory nerve, eighth nerve, and it hits the brain stem. Now, here's the brain stem. Look at how the proverbial crap hits the fan, okay? Over here, they're showing you the brain stem, and here's the cortex of the brain. You're looking at it from the side. And you can even see a fissure here. And that fissure there, if you were able to pull that apart, that's the real auditory areas of the brain. This is called your temporal lobe. So your frontal lobe for thinking, temporal lobes for speech and hearing, vision is the back of your brain, and sensory information and integration is right here. So, but let's look at that brain stem. The eighth nerve boom, hits something called the Canadian National. No, just kidding. Cochlear nucleus. Now we remember what our 4 terms were at the very beginning of our session last week. I'll pull this up in the notes and we'll scroll all the way to the beginning and look at how we divided things in terms of gray matter and white matter. So let's look at this again, right here. Okay, you have 4 things happening here. And this is what I would put a star by. Make sure you memorize these sentences here, because in the PowerPoint, it's basically going to be shown like this. Here's your square, okay? You have white matter and gray matter, right? And we said that the white matter of your brain, the white matter is the fatty sheath that lines the cord. So think of this pen, the refill is the actual neural axon going through it, and the plastic of the pen itself is the insulation. Okay? The white fatty insulation is called myelin. And gray matter is unmyelinated. It's not covered with that white stuff. So bundles, what's covered with the white stuff is the arms of the nerve. Remember the hot dog buns. So when you're looking at this picture here, the white hot dog buns along the nerve, along the arm of the nerve, that's the white matter. And the cell itself, that's gray matter. Okay, now we've got white matter and gray matter. We know what those are. This is the cell body. This is what feeds the nerve. And the long arm is what's sending information away from the nerve. Okay, so nerves are bundles of white axons. This is an axon, the arm, are bundles of those white axons in the peripheral nervous system. Tracts are bundles of white axons in the central nervous system. And what is the central nervous system? The brain and spinal cord. So the brain, brainstem, spinal cord, CNS. Now ganglia and nuclei on the bottom, bundles of gray cell bodies. They are unmyelinated. And an example in our field is the spiral ganglia in the cochlea. Just outside the scala media, the spiral ganglia, the bulges of cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system, yup, in the cochlea, ganglia. And nuclei, bundles of gray cell bodies in the central nervous system. So let's get an example of what a tract might look like. Well, here we go. Let's go to here. Here would be tracts. Look at the white matter. Those are tracts. Okay? In the peripheral nervous system, your arms and legs, the white matter bundles of those are called nerves. So nerves, tracts, ganglia, nuclei. There we have it. So now we go to our notes and we go on down to page 3, the top of page 3. Here we go. Central auditory nervous system. Auditory areas in the brain stem and brain. They consist of pairs of nuclei, or groups of neuron cell bodies linked by white tracts. Okay, so remembering from last week, nerves, tracts, ganglia, nuclei. Nerves and tracts are white matter. Ganglia and nuclei are unmyelinated gray matter. So here we go. Very important. Put a star by this because this is how your auditory nervous system is arranged. Pairs of nuclei, groups of neuron cell bodies in the brainstem, and they are linked by white axons, linked together by tracts, white matter. And each nucleus is tonotopic. Means in each of these nuclei, specific frequencies are represented in specific places. And another word, just like the cochlea, remember, like keys on a piano, highs at the base, lows at the apex. Same within all of these auditory areas going up into your brain. Those are all tonotopically arranged. Lots of decussation, crossover, crossover. So let's look at that brain stem and go inside of it here. So you're looking at, here's your brain stem. You've entered your skull. The bottom is the medulla. The middle is the pons. The top part is the midbrain. This is a frontal view, back view, medulla, pons, midbrain. I told you to look at the 4 bumps because we're going to be coming back to that. Here's the whole brain itself. Now you're above the brain stem, white areas, gray matter on the outside, myelinated versus myelinated. You can see it. Here's the sagittal view of your brain stem. Here's your medulla, pons, midbrain, thalamus, corpus callosum. And so for you, Nicole and Renee, who came in here just a little bit afterwards, we went over lots of this stuff before you had come in. So you'll be sure to take a peek at the 5 minutes or whatever at the beginning of this session, because there's some stuff that you missed here, but not the end of the world. Again, this is a slice down the brain, the 3 parts to the brain: cerebrum, the biggest part; cerebellum, controlling fine motor movement; brainstem. And again, medulla at the bottom, pons, midbrain, above that your thalamus, and above that your corpus callosum. I'm going to close the door here. My better half has come in and she hears me barking all the time, so hang on here. All right. This is the day when I'm talking out loud. All right, so now let's look at the brainstem. Boom, here's these nuclei. Let's put some concrete reality to these nuclei. So you're going inside the brainstem. You're going inside this guy. Okay, we're going to look at it this way. You're going to go inside. Here's the 8th nerve. Where would be the 8th nerve? Vestibular cochlear nerve. 8th nerve, right here. Thunk. So where does it enter the brainstem? At the junction of the pons and the medulla. That's where it reaches the brainstem. Doesn't reach down here, doesn't reach up here. It ends here. How long is the 8th nerve? 1 inch. Short. Each one. How long is this whole brainstem? 1 inch. Talking small. So 1 inch this way, inch this way. Okay. Back of the brainstem. Sagittal view of the brainstem. Sagittal view of the brainstem, turn the other way. Here, facing front, facing left, facing right. Same thing. Look at the similarities. This is real. This is a drawing. Okay? But always remember your gross major parts. Corpus callosum is the bridge that links the halves of your brain together. That's the bridge. We're going to finish this talk today talking about that, because that's the center of learning disabilities in children. Kids who can listen, or who can hear, they just can't listen. I was one of those. Okay, so now you're looking over here. Now let's watch what happens in the brainstem. Here you go. Cochlea, cochlea, 8th nerve, 8th nerve. This is the brainstem. Look at these nuclei, the gray areas. Pairs of them. Cochlear nucleus, cochlear nucleus. That's the first nuclei. So the 8th nerve leaves the inner hair cells, and where does it terminate? At the cochlear nuclei. That one here and this one here. And where are these cochlear nuclei? They are at the junction of the pons and the medulla. So now we've said that several times. Bet you dollars to donuts that puppy's on your final, but you'll, no problem. Here we go. So now what's the next pit stop? S-O. So what? Superior olives. They don't have a pimento, but they call them superior olives. Don't ask me why. Probably because they look like olives. Who knows? Then you've got LL. Lloyd's letters. No, I'm just teasing you. Lateral lemniscus. And we'll show you in the notes, so don't. And then you got another pair of nuclei, ICs, incompetent. No, inferior colliculi. Inferior colliculi. And then you got MG. That's not a little sports car, but that's medial geniculate bodies. These are in the thalamus. And then you're going to your auditory cortex. Okay, so all these areas being shown here are in this gray area here. And then you're exiting to the sides to the temporal lobes of the brain. Okay, and here you've got a breakdown as to what these initials mean. If we look in our notes now, let's follow it. Got your brain stem. It's simply the spinal cord inside your skull. It's got 3 parts. The midbrain is the top. The pons is the middle. The medulla is the bottom. Okay? Now, cochlear nucleus. That's the first pair of gray areas. Cochlear nucleus. Let's look at what these guys are, the bottom. So we'll start from the bottom and work our way to the top. Cochlear nucleus. Right and left eighth nerves go to right and left cochlear nucleus. The cochlear nucleus lie on the brainstem surface at the pontomedullary junction. At the pontomedullary junction. So here's the medulla where I'm circling, and this area would be the pons. Right here between, see where LL here is and SO, those are pons. And then the cochlear nucleus is just at the junction of the pons and the medulla. Again, to review, the pons is here, the medulla is here, and the eighth nerve meets at the junction. Okay, so that's where the cochlear nucleus is, right here and right here. And then inside this bubble here or inside of there is a bunch of stuff, but the auditory areas are superior olives and lateral lemniscus. Those 2 pairs of nuclei are located in the pons. And then this IC, inferior colliculus, that is here. I'll show you. The back of the brainstem. See the 4 bumps? Inferior colliculi are the bottom 2. They're for hearing. Superior colliculi are for vision. That's where information from eyes and ears meets. That's how, when you hear a sound and your ears localize the direction, your eyes turn in that direction too. That's happening at the level of the midbrain. Okay? Inferior colliculi are 2 nuclei for audition. Superior colliculi are 2 nuclei for vision. And this is where information, auditory and visual information meets. Okay? So now you're learning your pairs of nuclei here. Good. We work our way down the page here. At the bottom, cochlear nucleus. Right and left nerves end at the right and left cochlear nuclei. They lie at the brainstem surface at the pontomedullary junction. They are important for mental image of the distance of sound. An owl in a barn, in the hayloft. Here's the rustling under the hay of a mouse. Right away, the owl is making a mental image of where that mouse is. Okay? It's hungry, so it's going to eat. Mental image of the distance of sound. And there's that word again, decussation. Decussation means crossover. So let's look at our picture here. Look at all the crossover taking place. Okay, it looks like a messy set of highways. You've got crossover from this nucleus to that, and this nucleus up to the same side. Information stays to the same side, but it also keeps crossing over. You keep getting crossovers. Okay, that's called decussation. It means that if I took off half of my brain, I'd still hear with both ears. because information from both ears has been changing sides like crazy. Okay, here's your SO, superior olivary complex. Let's go in your notes and put a star by that one. There's a bit of information here, right there. Superior olivary complex area. Now, right there, they do some really cool things. The right and left SOC receive information from same side and opposite side. So let's look at that on the picture. Here they are. There's the S superior olives. They receive info from the same side and from the opposite side, each one. So this one has information from right and left ears. This one has information from right and left ears. It's the first pair of nuclei to have information from both ears. The superior olivary complexes are involved in localizing the direction of sound. Remember in psychoacoustics we said, why do you have two ears? Remember in psychoacoustics we said, oh, two ears, binaural summation. 2 ears are 5 dB better than one. Okay, that's one reason. Another reason was that cocktail effect thing we talked about. What was the third reason? Directionality. Now check this out. Let's tie information together from psychoacoustics and anatomy. Here we go. Stop sharing. Okay, here we are. I'm sitting here like this. Okay, and Nicole is talking to me from 1,000 miles away. Her voice is going to hit this ear a split second before it hits this ear. The superior olivary complex, those pair of nuclei are comparing the time of arrival. I've got 10 pounds of ugly fat separating this ear from this ear. Her voice is going to reach this ear a split second before this ear. The SOCs are comparing notes, saying which ear got it first. Oh, the left ear. Oh, turn that way. Okay? And then high frequency sounds, we said they don't bend. Highs bounce, right? Highs cause feedback in hearing aids. So high frequencies are so short that the superior olivary complexes cannot use time differences of arrival. They can't use that cue because the waves aren't going to be long enough to bend around my head. Okay, high frequencies are short. So what's going to be the cue that the SOCs use to localize high-pitched sounds is going to be tiny intensity differences. So once again, she's talking to me, I'm facing here, the sound of her voice will be slightly louder to this ear than it will to this ear because of my head shadow. Okay, that's the cue that the superior olives are going to use for me to detect the direction of high frequency sounds. So those two stupid little nuclei are really quite cool. Like these little guys right here are comparing time of arrival for me to localize the direction of low frequency sounds and tiny intensity differences between the ears for me to localize the direction of high frequency sounds. So all of that takes place right there. That's the first place in the brainstem that receives input from both ears. So they are involved in localizing the direction of sound. Cool. If you look at what else they do, there's a couple other things that they do. They are involved in the reflex arc. Okay? What's the reflex arc? Outer ear, then middle ear, then inner ear, then eighth nerve, then brain stem. And then what happens from the brain stem? Messages back out to the seventh nerve, which is attached to the tensor tympani muscle, and the fifth cranial nerve, which is attached to, no, the seventh cranial nerve is attached to the stapedius muscle. The fifth is attached to the tensor tympani, the middle ear. Remember your anatomy of the middle ear, the acoustic reflex. The acoustic reflex. The superior olivary complexes are involved in the acoustic reflex. Directionality of sound. And last of all, the nerve bundle that goes to the outer hair cells. Remember last week we talked about the 8th nerve being this great big massive superstate highway going God knows where, from Oklahoma City straight on down through to Dallas and on God knows where. Okay, remember we did that last week? And then I said beside that highway is a little country bumpkin road, a gravel road going the opposite direction. The 8th nerve is sending info from the inner hair cells to the brain. Yep, that's the big highway. And the little country bumpkin highway beside it is the olivocochlear bundle. And look at what the words say, olives to cochlea, olivocochlear bundle. And that's the brain talking to the outer hair cells. So it's a two-way street, 8th nerve from inner hair cells, 8th nerve to the brain, and back from the brain to the outer hair cells. And how does it get from the brain to the outer hair cells? The olivocochlear bundle nerve. Back to the outer hair cells, that nerve begins at the superior olivary complex. So you got 3 things that are involved with that silly little pair of nuclei. It gets easier from here because when we go up to the next step, look at this, lateral lemniscus. We don't know. Next. So this is here, the LL. We haven't got a clue. We don't know what they do. Next, inferior colliculi. Okay, these guys connect visual and auditory information. That's all fine and dandy. We've covered that already. So remember, cochlear nuclei lie at the pontomedullary junction. The superior olives and lateral lemniscus lie in the pons of the brainstem, the middle, and the inferior colliculi lie in the midbrain, which is the top of the brainstem. Okay? Top, middle, bottom. This is the back dorsal view. Okay? This is the frontal view. Same thing though. Medulla, pons, midbrain. What's located in the medulla, auditorily wise? Nothing. The 8th nerve ends at the junction. Cochlear nuclei would be here and here. SOCs would be here and here. The lateral lemnisci would be here and here. And the inferior colliculi and superior colliculi would be at the back of the brainstem. There you have it. Slane and Pimple. All right. So now we go higher up to the 5th area, the 5th pair of nuclei, medial geniculate bodies. These lie inside the thalamus. So if you're looking for a picture of that, the thalamus. Here we go, the thalamus. Medulla, pons, midbrain, thalamus. The grand central meeting station of all sensory information except smell. Okay? We don't know exactly what they do either. Not sure as to exactly what they do, but we do know they are heavily involved because if you take them out, you're deaf. Okay? Now the thalamus is located just below the corpus callosum, which is this white tract here. Okay? And by the way, BTW, okay, think of it like this. These are nuclei, the gray areas, and the arrows would be tracts. Gray areas, tracts. Gray area, tract. Okay? These are unmyelinated. These arrows are myelinated. White matter, gray matter. White matter, gray matter. Anyway, so if you're looking at here's another schematic of it. So now you've got the cochlea, 8th nerve, cochlear nuclei, superior olivary complex, lateral lemniscus, inferior colliculus, the Heschel's, the medial geniculate bodies, thalamus, midbrain, pons, okay, and the junction of the pons and the medulla is where the bottom set of nuclei are. Now I drew a weird little brain at the top here. Okay, you've got this weird little top of a brain, and we've got over here, now you've reached the cortex. Now you've reached the temporal lobes. Now you are at the wrinkly area of the brain. Heschel's gyrus. Heschel's gyrus. So if we can take a picture of the brain, you can't see it here because this is the sagittal version. So you're looking at the inner half. It's like I split my head in half and turned it this way, okay? So you can't see it there. This here, remember, that would be this fissure, the longitudinal fissure going this way. So this view is like you took a saw and you sliced my head open right down the middle and then turned it sideways. So you can't see them there. If you're going to see the sides of the brain, you have to look at the side of the brain. Here's the front of the guy, here's the back, here's the temporal lobe. Almost like my hand. Okay, my thumb, the back of my hand toward my wrist, my front knuckles, this will be the frontal lobe, the back of the brain. Heschel's gyrus would be inside. You'd have to take this temporal lobe and peel it back. You see the church and the steeple, open up the doors and see all the people. Okay? Basically. Essentially, it's what I'm trying to get at. You got to bend it, you have to open it up. So I like making you guys laugh. It's might as well, because this topic is strange. So here you go. Here's your temporal lobe. And then you've got your Heschel's gyrus. And you'd have to actually open it up. So now here's what they call a coronal vision. You slice my head this way. Okay? So you can see that longitudinal fissure where anatomists would put their hand down and encounter the corpus callosum here. And then here's that fissure on the side. That's this. And you'd have to peel it open and you'll find Heschel's gyrus. Heschel's gyrus is the prime, the main auditory area of the brain. Here it is again, showing you now the front of the person is this way. Okay? Occipital lobe for vision, temporal lobe for speech and hearing, and the auditory area is kind of seen when you're bending it open. That's the very center area of hearing and very important for speech. So these areas here, okay, we'll talk a little bit about these so that we can finish this section here. So Heschel's gyrus, back to your notes, it's the primary auditory cortex. It's a gray area. Each of them, you have two, one on the right, one on the left, buried deep inside each temporal lobe of the brain. You'd need to pull apart the fissure to see it. And get this, I wrote this in italics, it's larger in the left than in the right for most people. Not everyone. For people who are left-handers, it's even in size. But for people who are right-handed, it's larger in the left. Now this has quite the meaning or implication for people who've had a stroke. People who've had a blood vessel burst in the brain. They call that a stroke. And strokes often affect the left temporal lobe more than the right. And when you've got a hemorrhaging of your left temporal lobe, well, your speech, you're losing your ability to talk. Now, sometimes the loss is the ability to have meaning in language. Other times, the loss is an ability to form your lips right. You know what you want to say. You can handwrite it, but you can't say it. Give me the fork. They're trying to say the fork. You know, they can't pronounce it. But the worst kind of stroke is the kind that's the little old lady at the nursing home who's had a terrible stroke and she's going, oh, goddamn, motherfucker, she can talk, but there's no meaning. Like she's, you know, that can happen. That's called a fluent aphasia. The word for a stroke is called aphasia. A-P-H-A-S-I-A, aphasia. And you can have two kinds of aphasia, fluent aphasia and disfluent aphasia. Fluent aphasia means you can talk. Oh yeah, you can talk, but you don't give a ding dong about what you're saying. You can pronounce, no problem, but your ability to use language is gone. Whereas disfluent aphasia means you know what you want to say. Your language ability is all intact. You just can't pronounce it. Your motor movement of your mouth is what's affected. It's almost like a cerebral palsy of the face, okay? That's the better kind to have, because at least you haven't lost your marbles. Okay, at any rate, aphasia, stroke. This is just kind of just to give you just an idea of what the auditory areas are of the brain. It's just okay. Now, the Heschl's gyrus is a cortical area, and it's the first area of auditory perception or conscious auditory awareness. Heschl's gyrus sends information to auditory association areas, further away from it. Association areas. Association areas are what are involved in aphasia. Okay? Broca's area, Wernicke's area. Two areas. If you've got, and Broca's area and Wernicke's area, they are very close to this Heschl's gyrus. Here's Heschl's gyrus right here. Broca's area is right here. And Wernicke's area is right there. If you want to get a stroke, better to have damage here. Because if you've got this kind of aphasia, you know what you want to say, you just can't say it. You've got disfluent aphasia, the better kind. If your damage is here, this is Wernicke's area. Now you can talk fluently, but you're just yakking like a bat out of hell, and you don't give a good ding-dong what you're talking about. Okay, that's the sadder kind of aphasia. Anyway, these areas around Heschl's gyrus are called auditory association areas. Heschl's gyrus is the primary cortical area. Okay, so now we can take this home and put this topic to bed. Let's talk about the corpus callosum. It's the bridge that links the halves of your brain. It's the largest tract in your body. It takes about 14 years to myelinate, to finish developing and turning pure white. And it is what is involved in what they call central auditory processing disorders. Now, children with learning and language disabilities, okay? Most of the time, boys, not as often girls. Girls tend to have a more balanced brain. And to talk in generalities, women tend to be able to multitask better than men. They just can. The halves of the brain are talking to each other better. Okay? Men are often very good at focusing on one thing. I can get into all kinds of weird sexist jokes here, but I mean, it really is, there is a difference. Little girls learn to talk before little boys. Their language acquisition precedes boys. Boys catch up, but girls are quicker at developing language skills. Now, there's a test that is done by audiologists, not HISs, but audiologists often test children for learning disabilities. If they're bouncing off the walls in school, and many of these are little boys, they can hear, their ears are fine, pure tone testing, normal, they just can't focus. They can't pay attention. They can hear, they just aren't listening. So let's check it out. What do? They do a test called dichotic digits. Now look at this stuff. Read with me and then I'll show you what they do. There's lots of names for children with learning disabilities. Central auditory processing disorders, attention deficit disorders, attention deficit hyperactivity disorders, learning disorders. It all depends on who the kid got diagnosed by. It's often poorly defined and grossly overdiagnosed. More boys than girls tend to be labeled with learning disabilities, and it could very well just be a simple matter that boys learn differently from girls. Maybe boys require more visual and tactile and experiential learning than girls do. Beware of simplistic explanations for brain and speech, like the right is for music and the left side's for speech. That's too simple. It might be more like the right brain, the right Heschel's gyrus, is good at detecting slow, continuous sounds, much like music, whereas the left temporal lobe and left Heschel's gyrus is better for interpreting fast changes, like speech. So anyway, central auditory processing disorders often involves a difficulty with listening as opposed to pure hearing loss. Look at the test done at Missouri State University in Springfield, Missouri. You could walk over from OTC and listen to an audiologist do a test for central auditory processing disorders. And one of the tests that they will use is the dichotic digits test. Here we go. Let's look at this guy. Dichotic digits test. Now, notice the crossover areas. Before we get into that, because we only got like another 12 minutes here, so check this out. Here's your eighth nerve. Here's your eighth nerve. Cochlear nucleus, crossover, inferior colliculi, medial geniculate bodies, and look at now the radiations out from the brain stem, where I'm circling, to the temporal lobes. Okay, so you're going out to here, and not only are you radiating out, you're also crossing over. Now this drawing is wrong because they're showing the right hemisphere as having a larger Heschel's gyrus than the left, and it's exactly back-asswards. Okay, don't worry about that, but note the two crossovers. One crossover area, one decussation area is in the brain stem, but the second crossover is through the corpus callosum. I'll show it to you again on another slide. Here's the outer ear canal, middle ear. Here's your eustachian tube going down to your throat. This is a slice of the head this way. I just sliced my face off, okay? So now you're looking at my brains. So here's your ears, canals, middle ear, eustachian tube, cochlea, eighth nerve, brain stem. Look at the crossover taking place up to the inferior colliculi, up to the thalamus areas, radiating to the right and left Heschel's gyrus, and then you've got your crossover happening again. Note the two crossovers, brain stem, corpus callosum. Now let's get into the dichotic digits test. This is how they do it. You've looked at that radiation system, you've looked at the crossovers. Here's what they do. They give this young punk, this little 9-year-old boy who's bouncing off the walls, they put headphones on him, right ear, left ear, and then they give the child pairs of digits. And they give the pairs of digits at the same time. So 1-9, for example, 6-4, it's okay. Now the word dichotic means different information at the same time. It's really weird. Let's just bring it home. Have you ever been talking on the phone and you're trying to give directions to someone who's calling you on the phone? A relative is, yeah, I'm just outside of town, but I can't quite. So you're giving directions and you're trying to listen on the phone. And then your wife is screaming in your ear going, no, that's the wrong, no, tell him he's got to turn over. So you're getting one piece of information here and different information there, and it's okay. Dichotic is not a natural way to listen to sound. Okay, usually it's diotic. You get similar information to both ears. Okay, when you're getting dichotic, you're getting different information simultaneously, which is a very unnatural way to hear. And guess what? A chain is as strong as its weakest link. And that's exactly what they're trying to tax. They're taxing this child's auditory system. So here goes. Pairs of numbers between 0 and 10, and not 7, because 7 has 2 syllables. It's the only number they don't use. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10. And they will give pairs of those numbers in random order at the same time. So 1964, and the boy has to repeat them back. Now guess what happens in that boy? He usually has a right ear advantage, and here's why. There's 2 things to take an assumption of. There's 2 things that happen here. Mark these down well. Number 1, the left temporal lobe is dominant for language. We've said that before. The left Heschel's gyrus is dominant for language in most people. Okay, that's the one assumption. And the second assumption, and you'll see it on your slide because you guys have access to this too. You can look at this after, but the second assumption is here. During dichotic listening, and only during dichotic listening, otherwise this doesn't happen. During dichotic listening, different information at the same time, contralateral pathways suppress ipsilateral pathways. Ipsi is same side, contra is opposite side. So again, look at number 2 here. During dichotic listening, contralateral pathways suppress ipsilateral. So watch what happens with the digits. Right ear is red, left ear is blue, pair of digits here, pair of digits here, same time. What happens? The right ear goes contralaterally to the dominant left hemisphere and gets processed, no problem. The left ear, however, goes to the non-dominant right hemisphere, and that has to cross over the corpus callosum to get to the dominant hemisphere. So the left ear during dichotic listening has a longer pathway. And that is why the boy tends to remember most of the digits presented to his right ear. He has a right ear advantage. In most people, there will be a slight right ear advantage because of these 2 assumptions that we're talking about. But in the little boy whose corpus callosum is not myelinated very well, okay, over here, this is not done yet. It is not done yet. And when that's not done yet, during dichotic digits testing, the little boy is going to have a monstrous right ear advantage because this corpus callosum here isn't done yet. So left ear information has a hell of a time getting to the dominant hemisphere. And that is a test done by audiologists to assess for central auditory processing dysfunction. So if I was to mention to you, or I'll stop sharing here, and I'll say, what are the 2 kinds of retrocochlear pathology that we've discussed last week and this week? 8th nerve tumor, that's what we talked about last week, that'll kill you. And the other one is, I can hear, I just can't listen. Okay, central auditory processing dysfunction. And you know what? It's not all bad. You know what I think it is? They're not testing what they say they're testing gender. Because little boys do learn different from girls. And that's nothing wrong with that. Let's go back 40,000 years. Roll the clock back. Back. Before the age of the Middle Ages, back before Christ, back before the Babylonians, back to where people lived in caves. And the women and children would sit in front of the fire, keeping warm and telling stories. What do you think the men were doing? They were probably doing anything but facing the fire and telling stories. They were probably leaned away from the fire with their spears sticking out. Okay? They're not concentrating on what's being, no, they're doing exactly the opposite because they're trying to protect what's inside. They're just different. Just different. The brain is a little bit different, and the way they learn is a little bit different, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think labels are really bad. Labels stick. And when you label someone with learning disabilities, you can't get that label off for love nor money. It sticks on that kid all the way through high school. It sticks, and then the kid believes it, and he's on Ritalin and all this other crap. And I think to myself, you know what? Why not just accept the fact that he learns a little bit differently? Why not accept the fact that you need to show him tactilely a little bit more, and instead of just purely oral instruction and expect him to chances are, you know what happens to a lot of these boys? They end up getting picked up by cops for stealing in the mall because they're flunking out of school. So they're hanging around in the mall, getting high or doing whatever. They get picked up, they get thrown in juvenile detention hall. And then they get out again, and then they get thrown back in again. And finally the judge says, you know what, you're going in the Army. The boy goes into the Army, gets 3 square meals a day and a rigid routine, and he ends up being about the best frickin' helicopter pilot around. Just a different brain. Really smart, actually usually above average in intelligence. Just not the kind that colors all within the lines. It just doesn't do that. Okay, his mind is just a different. There's nothing wrong with it. Thank God there's differences. What a bore it would be if we were all the same. Anyway, all right, with that, I will end 120 anatomy. Okay, we've gone over the pieces of the brainstem. We've gone over the nuclei within those pieces of the brainstem. We're looking at white areas, looking at gray areas. Basically, for us, HISs, not audiologists, but for us, when we see asymmetrical sensory neural loss, when we do a hearing test, and one ear is different than the other, and it's not due to an ear infection, and it's not due to more noise exposure to one ear than the other ear. You've taken a good case history. The person may be a 30-year-old mom with 3 kids. No reason to have sensory neural hearing loss worse in one ear than the other. That's a red flag. That's where you and I have to go, could be an 8th nerve tumor, because 8th nerve tumors are always one side, never both. Okay, so it's a red flag for us to know when to refer, but you're going to learn a whole lot more about that in 130 and in your future courses, because I think you've got intro to audiometry, and I think you also have advanced audiometry. You have 2 more courses in audiometry, so you will learn all about that. But we will be covering 8th nerve pathology, the actual pathology, not the anatomy, but the disorder, this summer in 125 hearing disorders. So we will encounter this topic again. All right. Cheers. See you when we look at you. All right. Now we're done. Here I am in 110 saying signing off, and I forgot we were meeting an hour later. All right. So here we go. Thanks for showing up. Okay. Bye-bye.